Here are 5 tips that may or may not help you when it comes to studying Japanese. To preface, I have been studying Japanese for about 8 years now. I live in Canada, and Canada is by no means the best place to start studying Japanese. However, I self-studied for quite a few years, and then I moved on to studying Japanese in a Japanese university. So while I am definitely not an authority on studying Japanese at all, I do think I have a lot of experience. I worked in the classroom, I've seen many different teaching and learning styles, and please do take everything I say with a grain of salt. While everything I'm going to suggest has worked for me personally, that doesn't mean it's going to work for you necessarily. So I do recommend at least trying everything that I include on this list, as you really don't know what works for you until you try. So my first tip is to figure out your goals. So why do you want to study Japanese? And I think that's pretty obvious. Originally, I didn't have a goal, I just kind of wanted to speak Japanese, and it kind of took a toll on me because I didn't really have any goals in mind. I do think having a goal in mind is absolutely necessary in order to be able to study long term. In my opinion, the stronger your will to study or your goal is, the more likely you are to continue to study. If you only want to study Japanese for fun, just to understand a few of the words in your favorite anime, obviously that's fine, but how you would go about studying varies greatly depending on your goal. So if you want to one day live in rural Japan versus wanting to be able to speak Japanese with native Japanese speakers, wanting to be able to read novels without any difficulties, wanting to be able to just watch anime passively, all of them are obtainable. You just need to have your goal in mind when you're going to start studying, because how you go about studying will change depending on what you want. For example, if you want to be able to read without any problems, you're probably going to dedicate more time to learning the vocabulary that's common in books, and you're probably going to spend more time learning kanji versus practicing your listening comprehension. Of course, it's okay to change your goals midway through. I did. Originally, I had no goals. The important thing is just to have a goal. For example, if your goal is to work as a translator, you may choose to focus more on written Japanese right from the get-go. If your goal is just to be able to read fashion magazines in Japanese, you might focus on learning specifically fashion-related vocabulary first. So it just depends on what you want to do. My second tip is that you need to understand that written language is very important. No matter what your goal is, I think that learning hiragana and katakana should be one of the very first, if not the very first thing that you do when you start studying Japanese. If you didn't know, Japanese constantly uses 3 alphabets, and you need to be able to read all 3 to be proficient. 2 of these alphabets are phonetic and are much easier to read than the 3rd. In order to be able to study grammar and vocabulary, you do need to be able to read said grammar and vocabulary. And while some entry-level textbooks do write everything out in what we call romaji, or English characters, they do typically begin only using Japanese characters, like even within the 2nd or 3rd chapter. Learning how to read kanji, the 3rd alphabet, is also incredibly important if you're trying to attain fluency. But personally, I believe that the battle to learn kanji is a marathon, not a sprint. Starting to learn kanji from scratch is incredibly time-consuming. It can be really overwhelming. I think the most important thing to understand is that if English is your first language, you're most likely not going to be able to read every kanji character that you encounter, even after a full year of studying. And I know to some people that can be a little bit disheartening, but it shouldn't be. Kanji is difficult if you're not used to it. It's a whole new writing system, it's a whole new game. Everything is different from English. My 3rd tip is that you should set obtainable goals for yourself. Keeping up your motivation is incredibly important when it comes to doing just about anything. One way that I personally like to keep myself motivated is to set weekly goals for myself. This is something that I still do even now, years after I began studying. The only thing that has changed is the magnitude of my goals. Your goal can be just about anything, from learning one kanji every single day to remembering 10 new words every day. I don't personally think it's important what your goal is. It's important that you have a goal. Having these goals keeps you consistent. If you want to learn one new kanji every single day, you're more likely to force yourself to study on days, even if you're feeling kind of lazy and you don't really want to study. Even if you come up short some days, if you miss a day, that can be good motivation for you to try a little bit harder the next day. So while you're keeping your goals, I think it's important to understand what you can achieve, what's a little bit too aggressive of a goal, and it's important to be kind to yourself when you don't meet your goals. You should also try and pick a goal that is a little bit challenging for you, because if it's too easy, you might get bored of it. My fourth tip is to find a media that you love to engage with. And I think this is my most important tip personally for me, because while textbooks are a fantastic resource when it comes to studying Japanese grammar, I don't think they should be the only resource that you use. While they're certainly educational, they oftentimes tend to be rather unengaging and just sort of boring. As I personally love reading my manga, I used to use kid-friendly manga to help me increase my vocabulary right from the very beginning. This was not glamorous by any means, as I had to check every single word in the dictionary one by one, and it would take me like a good 10 to 20 minutes just to read one page. But it ended up helping me immensely eventually. Just at the beginning, it took a very, very long time. I'm not telling you that you must be constantly reading manga all the time to improve your Japanese. Just specifically, I love manga, so that's what worked for me. Some examples of other things that could potentially help you study. If you have an interest in fashion, try reading Japanese fashion magazines. If you enjoy playing Nintendo games, you can set the language in many, at least North American Nintendo games, to Japanese. Personally, if you want to go the Nintendo game route, I recommend trying out Pokemon in Japanese, as there's no kanji, at least in the games that I've played. So everything is written in hiragana and katakana, which is very friendly for beginners. And if you're an avid movie watcher, I recommend checking out what's called the Language Reactor Chrome extension. It provides subtitles in both English and Japanese, and also gives definitions to new to you words when you hover over them with your mouse. I found this to be incredibly helpful, as it shows Japanese and English right beside each other. And my fifth tip is that learning grammar is very important, but so is vocabulary. I delved into this a little bit in my previous tip. However, I do think it's important enough that I want to talk about it a little bit more in its own category. Increasing your vocabulary is very important, while understanding that grammar is also an absolute must if you want to be able to form a coherent sentence. You won't be able to form a sentence if you don't know any words. Personally, I think it's a good idea to study both grammar and vocabulary at the same time, but I would put just a little bit more effort into the vocabulary side, as while you learn new grammar, you will automatically learn new vocabulary as well. But if you don't try and dive a little bit deeper, you might not actually know what you're saying. That is to say, many people remember new grammar sayings as set phrases. So you'll remember the phrase, but you won't know what each word in the phrase means. And while of course this can help you memorize how to say a full sentence or phrase, you're not going to be fully understanding exactly what you're saying. For example, the phrase sureba suru hodo is a grammar point that can be translated to the more you do, the more ba 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 ba. When I first learned this phrase, I didn't know the eva conjugation. I also didn't know what hodo meant either. So because of this, while I knew what sureba suru hodo meant altogether, I couldn't break it down any more than that. So while I knew what I was saying, I wouldn't have been able to tweak how I said it whatsoever. If you think any of these tips are helpful, please let me know if you try them out. These are my 5 tips to hopefully help you study Japanese.